Welcome to Innovation Out of Failure, where we talk to people about their careers and, most importantly, about the challenges they have faced that actually end up making them more successful innovators in the end. I am Andrew Lyon, Dean of the Fowler School of Engineering at Chapman University, and I'm your host for this series. This week, we're speaking with Trenelle Lyiscott, who has navigated a winding path through the tech industry in Orange County, from hardware to fashion and now to cybersecurity, all while developing some awesome perspectives on how to challenge yourself to grow as a person every day. Okay, welcome to Innovation Out of Failure. Today I am joined by Trenelle Lyiscott from Cytelix. How are you, Trenelle?
I'm awesome. How are you, Andrew?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for joining us.
Very welcome.
So,
Very welcome. Excited for this.
um, I love your industrial background there. It looks like you're ready to go do some spot welding or
Yeah,
something.
right.
But
Something, right?
but your place of business is actually more in the tech space, right? So Cytelix is a cybersecurity company. You're a Chapman grad, go Panthers. But your degree is actually an MBA from Chapman, and you've parlayed that into a career now in cybersecurity. I wonder if you could share with the students a little bit about kind of how you navigated that path and how you ended up in that cyber world. And then, now is a really, really crazy time. You and I were talking before we started about how the current environment with the pandemic has kind of changed the world a lot in terms of how your business operates. So maybe you could share some of that as well.
Yeah, sure. And thanks again for having me on here, Andrew. So appreciate it. And definitely love being involved any way I can with Chapman. So as you mentioned, I did kind of take a different path toward this tech space. MBA usually doesn't translate into cybersecurity. So I always tell people that the way I got into this, I would say, industry was really the whole who you know. I really understood the importance of networking at a very young age. Always keep my ears and eyes out for people around me that I thought were growing or very progressive, or you can really just see how they captured a room when they walked in, or things that I knew I wanted to grow into as a young woman, but I wasn't really sure how to do that. So especially my MBA program at Chapman, because the class size was so small and really intimate, it gave me time to really develop those skills of how to build great relationships. And that's really carried me forward. So in terms of how I got here, it was really a lady who owned this company for about 27 years before I came on. Knew her through church, and she talked about how she wanted to expand the business into a commercial marketplace away from just a federal specific marketplace. So that kind of intrigued me. I wasn't necessarily looking for a job in cybersecurity. It was kind of just a conversation. And she had seen me over the few years I had been at that church, kind of, again, building relationships. Everyone kind of knew me. I was very friendly, very talkative, asking questions, asking people to go on coffee dates. That's always been kind of my thing. And she said, I'd love for you to come on board and kind of help me get this started. And I was very clear with her that I had no technical background. The acronyms were beyond me, but she was willing to work with that. She said, hey, those are things you learn, which I think in any industry it has its own kind of lingo. So she brought me on. I tried it out. It's kind of funny. I tried it out for a month. She said, come on, just try it out for a month. It was kind of a, if you don't like it, put it back kind of thing. So I went there, tried it out for a month. And what really made me say, okay, let's stretch a little bit and learn this stuff was because of the events we were going to, the people I was meeting, how open they were and sharing exactly what you're asking. How did you get there? And I'm always asking people that I think who are successful, how did you get there? What are some key things you have done? And a lot of it is around networking. And I said, okay, well, I'm pretty chatty. I can probably maneuver this industry pretty well. And then from there, of course, it came with the training and learning things from security engineers and the different security architects and things like that, the bare basics, because again, I'm not a big acronym person, but that alone just allowed me to be able to just have the basic conversations, but really get down to the weeds of what an organization is looking for or what a company may be in need of and what are some of those gaps they may have. So that's kind of how I got here and been within this role now as a cybersecurity support manager for about 4 years. And along the way, I've had, I think this is my third title change for the company. So really grown pretty quickly here. So that's been pretty fun just to, again, stretch and grow, kind of stretch myself and say, okay, you can do a little bit more. Okay, you can do this. Now you can do that because I've actually taken the time to kind of immerse myself in the various roles thus far. So hope that helps.
No, that's fantastic. I love that concept of kind of stretching and growing, putting yourself out there, making sure making sure you challenge yourself, right? And by making it clear that you can challenge yourself, people around you, I'm sure, gain more confidence in you and probably put a lot more on your plate.
Oh yeah, now that's definitely a part of it. I always tell folks, and when I've had this question a few times, like, how can I get into cyber? How can I get into cyber? And I tell them, if you could pick any role with a technical company that has cybersecurity in there, and literally it becomes shadowing, asking questions, being intuitive, and a lot of it happens outside of the office. And I think that's something I've learned a lot of. I think I was so hung up in trying to just be in the office and be the overachiever where I kind of failed in not personally growing outside of that. And that's where I think the combination of the two makes yourself that much more, I would say, not just respected, but people actually trust what you're doing because they're noticing you're growing and it's not from what they're teaching you. And people notice that. So for me, I took an active role in personal growth. And I think that's something we kind of lose sight of as we grow in corporate America or in these careers. It's like, I'm doing better at my job, but are you becoming better as a person, which is so much more important. I think that's the priceless part of things, right? Like that's the priceless part is, are you taking time to grow outside of your job? Because that can go tomorrow. In the pandemic, we've seen that. I've had a lot of friends that had higher level positions and they're no longer having them right now because of the pandemic. So if you're growing outside of that, you're always attracting the right people around you. And then when they notice your need, they're quick to say, hey, I can help you. I have a position, or I know someone that knows someone. And that's how it kind of comes together pretty, I would say, fluidly there.
And so in your role, you're super client facing, right? You're every
Yeah.
day interacting with the companies that your company supports. That personal growth mentality must therefore be, hugely beneficial for you as you're interacting with companies that typically are struggling a little bit, probably pretty stressed about where they are as a company, usually under some extreme threat from an outside actor. And, that kind of positivity and that forward-looking approach must be beneficial as you build those relationships as well.
Yes, and not even just for the companies I'm talking to, even my internal folks, because my team, I noticed I would say I like to chat, I like to talk and things like that. I have a team that's pretty quiet, that can be pretty quiet, very into their screens and into what they're doing. We have white hackers on the staff, so they're like, very into the weeds of things. So when I would say my bigger personality comes out, they're kind of like, okay, Trenelle, this is a lot for me to take in. So I had to learn to adapt to them too. So some team members I know I can be my bubbly self with, and other ones it's kind of straight to the point, very serious, because that's just their personality. So that's kind of the pivots I've had to make in terms of building relationships. I have a great relationship with everyone on my team, but they're all so different. I mean, the stuff we talk about one-on-one is so different from each other, and they do, of course, very intense roles. And then when it comes to clients, I'm always I enjoy talking to clients because I'm always looking for, how can I make sure they win? Because most of the folks I'm talking to are usually CEOs. I talk to a lot of C-suites because they're small, medium businesses. So the CEO is doing everything, right? They're, mopping the floors and building the machines, and, they're doing multiple positions. So when they think about cybersecurity, they're kind of thinking another thing on my plate. Yes, I need it, but it's another thing on my plate. And I'm usually talking to CFOs or COOs. They're thinking about how much does this cost? So I'm going to every one of these conversations with the mindset of how do I make sure you win? Whether CEO is going after a big contract or CFO is trying to, get a good deal, right? Those type of things happen. And then when I think of talking to some of the IT staff, their goal is they have reviews that they're supposed to have with their higher ups. And they want to show that I'm doing my job. I'm securing you guys. So I want to make sure that I'm presenting it like, hey, this is going to make you look good on paper, that you actually are showing progress in your cybersecurity. So again, taking the time to not just try and I'm not a seller. I tell people all the time, like, I'm not a salesperson, come get this for $10 off. Like, I just don't operate like that. I'm really big on making sure that whoever I'm talking to is going to win, because if they're not going to win, there's no incentive for them to really want to do this. And then it'll be a waste and then they'll get the bad reviews. And then it becomes a trigger point for a lot of other bad things. So I like to just, if we're not a good fit, hey, we're not a good fit. Like what we're seeing now in this pandemic, a lot of folks that said, we don't need you, have now come back saying, actually, Trenelle, take that back, I actually do. But now they see like, I actually do see benefit in that. So it really is finding that win-win internally with your team, but also externally with whoever you're talking to, I've learned.
So you bring up a great point that the pandemic has changed things for a lot of companies. What are some of the key things that you're seeing that have really emerged or expanded given the current environment?
I see a huge gap in people having the necessary credentials or experience in this realm. It's so crazy. I mean, I wish, like in hindsight, I'm like, man, I wish I would have had all these different certificates and cybersecurity certificates, because the amount folks are willing to pay right now for that expertise because of the amount of hacking going on. I mean, if you're a millennial, if you're like me, you've already had 3, 4, 5 jobs already. Right now, you'll be like, I'm going to land a 6-figure deal, and I'm going to be set forever. It's pretty interesting to see how the workforce is just not there right now in a time where, again, we couldn't predict this pandemic. But it also tells you, like, programs like what you're starting, right? You know, and the importance of having these students be ready to hit the ground running when they come out of school, or even doing things on a part-time basis, even on an intern basis, because companies are needing that and they can't afford to wait anymore. It's kind of like, I have to get some cybersecurity expertise in-house. And that's something you're pricing in the market right now. It's not cheap at all because of, again, the limited amount of people that are available. So that's one thing I've seen. And then the number of hacks right now is a very vulnerable time because people are working from home more. So again, as I mentioned, like, we have our work computers, but we're more prone to say, okay, let me just go browse a couple of sites while I'm on my work computer versus powering up my personal one. And then that just creates other vulnerabilities, right? So a lot of companies simply wasn't prepared for this drastic change in such a short period. They didn't really have much time to prep. And because of that, their companies are hurting. We had a company a couple of weeks ago who was hacked through their Alexa in office. They hadn't been updating it, patching it. They hadn't been in the office much, right? So the Alexa was under attack, and it was some extracted data from there, not much, because we caught the alert saying, okay, this device is acting strange, but it's because they didn't think about, yeah, they're at home, but they're not thinking about the machines in the office. Let's make sure they still got to get patched. They still are updates coming out. So we're seeing quite a bit of that stuff happening. So we have not slowed down in the pandemic. I actually feel like this is probably the busiest I've been in the last 4 years I've been here, by far, for sure. So we'll see what comes out of it, but I'm happy we're finally starting to take cybersecurity seriously as companies. I think once we start getting on the same wave with personal security, we might be in better shape in the U.S. for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that the current situation and the much more kind of distributed workforce that we've got now, it's going to, force us to really change the way we think, and then, of course, the way we behave around this.
We have to.
So let's talk about something else. As you know, this class in part is about innovation, right? It's about, how we see that in our own daily lives. What do you think of when you think of that word? How do you define that? And maybe not necessarily in your own work sector, but even more broadly.
I think personal innovation is the ability to pivot at any time if it's something that you want to grow in. I think for a long time, especially coming out of school, because I had mostly a business background, I felt I have to stay in that sector. It has to be business something. If it's not business something, I'm not doing what my calling is, in essence, right? Versus saying, okay, the market's changing. This is becoming more, more known. People are saying they need more of this. I see it going in this direction. It's okay to Trenelle to pivot. It's okay for that. So innovation to me is really being willing and able to stretch. I always talk about, one thing I'm big on is I call myself a comfort zone expander. I think that's important because for me, it's in the times where I felt like the bubble guts or like the nervousness of I don't really want to do it. And the minute I push through and do it, it's like a huge breakthrough on the other side where I'm like, wow, I could have missed all this if I was stuck in the nervousness or the scared, being scared of not taking that risk. And that was really what this job was for me. Prior to this, I started off, I was recruited with Verizon Wireless right out of college after undergrad to do an apprentice program with them for, every 6 months I would rotate positions throughout their corporate sector. Great job. That was completely all telecom, right? We know telecom very well. Then from there, I went to a manufacturing company that made Apple Watch cases for like the Apple Watch. Is completely different, right? And I was working with Mophie, and that was power batteries. And I mean, just things I'm kind of like, wow, this is different. Okay. And then now with this company, cybersecurity, none of those positions I've had are based on my degrees. It's kind of interesting when I look back on it. I'm like, wow, most people would have said, Trenelle, why didn't you stay in business? But in essence, I've always been in business, but it's been around creating partnerships, growing relationships, sustaining those relationships. And it's been pretty cool because I've learned so many different industries where I think I would not have done that if I wasn't just the person of taking risks and being okay with it. Because again, it's kind of like, if you don't want to be stuck in a career next 40 years and you wake up, you're like, I hated it. It's like, well, you could have left, 39 years ago. So that's definitely been my MO, I would say, is just being okay with expanding that comfort zone, because then that becomes your new comfort zone and you expand a little bit more and you grow from there. And I think because I didn't have many examples that showed me that around the people I was with in terms of networking, I've seen how much they were doing it. And I said, okay, Trenelle, you have to jump on this bandwagon. Because if not, you're going to be stuck looking up, regretting things. And that's something I try not to do. I try not to do.
So people like yourself who are constantly stretching themselves, constantly expanding, and I love that you spoke about the different industries that you've touched, because that kind of breadth of knowledge and understanding, along with that attitude and perspective, are hugely enabling. Now, from my point of view, the problem with that is people like yourself become incredibly valuable parts of whatever organization you're in, to the point that you tend to get all the jobs, right? So how do you balance that kind of constant pushing forward, constant growth mindset with the tendency to take on too much, which can then really disincentivize you from that personality trait?
Yeah, you hit it on the nail. It's something I'm definitely still trying to navigate, in all transparency. I think I've been grateful because every role I've had, I've always reported direct to the CEO or president. So with that being said, it becomes, I'm big on, again, relationship building. So my current president, him and I have a great relationship. So I can be very transparent with him when I'm like, okay, this is a bit much. I can't do this. Here's my limit. And he's like, okay, T, that's fine. So it's one of those things of speaking up, but having that relationship to make it clear. And I also know on his side, when he's overwhelmed, I'm like, okay, what else can I pick up off of him? Because I can tell he's a bit overwhelmed. So we have that kind of two-way relationship. But again, I think this is probably one of the areas where I think my relationship building skills have done me the best, that I've seen the best results from, is being very honest about it. Because of course we definitely hit those walls where it's like, okay, I am overwhelmed. I am done. I just need a breather. I just want to go on a month hiatus if I can. We have those, right? But that's something I definitely constantly navigate. But I think because of relationships I have with my direct report, and he knows all the work I do. And he's like, if I say that, he's like, okay, Trenelle must really need to slow down. I'm gonna let her slow down. Hey, Trenelle, take a couple of days, relax, turn everything off, whatever that looks like for me, right? But that transparency and that honesty, I think, is important, because if not, I would see myself job hopping a lot. I think I can fall into that very quickly, because selling myself is not hard. But again, it's kind of like, do you want to keep doing that over and over and over again? And that's not the goal. I think that's definitely not the goal. So that transparency, but also honesty with whoever you're working with, is so important. So they know your limits, but you also know their limits, because sometimes you may need to step up a little bit to help them out. And even though my president is the president, I'm kind of like, well, they pay you the big bucks for this. I get that he needs help too. And I'm okay with, helping him, as need be. And he appreciates that. So again, he knows when I say it, he's like, okay, Trenelle, whatever you need. So, but I am still learning that. And I think not just in work though, I think that's in life in general. I think with my family, I've had to put up some better boundaries as well, because they're like, oh, Trenelle, you don't have kids yet. You can do all this other stuff. But I think boundaries is really important. I think it really is important in every arena in life. It's you got to have them, because if not, you look up and you're drained and just tired and exhausted and almost making yourself ill because you weren't paying attention to your slow down cues, is what I call them.
Mm-hmm. And yes, that those cues, those indications that you've pushed yourself too far. But by the same token, is it true that because you are constantly stretching and constantly testing yourself, do you feel like you have a better sense of those cues, a better sense of those boundaries?
Oh yeah, I definitely, I catch it pretty quickly. And for me, it can be as small as like, I'm starting to get headaches. I'm not motivated to work out anymore. And I usually am consistently working out 3-4 times a week. It could be I'm eating out more often. It's certain things that I'll know, like, okay, Trenelle, you're going down this path where it's not you. I'm not reading as often. I try to read at least 15 minutes a day. And if I have too many days strung together when I don't do it, it's like, what is going on in your schedule? Why are you being so overwhelmed? Why are you going to bed so early? Why are you waking up so? It's different cues my body usually tells me that it's time to slow down. And when that happens, I'm like, no, no fighting it back. I'm like, okay, it's time. But that's really important for me. And I can get really agitated. It's like really short, like, oh, I don't want to do this. And usually that's not me. So again, I know these different indicators, as you mentioned, where it's like, it's time to slow down. And it's okay to do that. It's better to do that than to crash. And
Right.
then you made yourself ill, or you push people away, or things like that, where that was your intention, but you've let things build up for so long that that was the only way to get it out. And that's the part I try to again avoid by watching those indicators and saying, okay, slow down, Trenelle, it's okay, everyone needs it. I mean, giving myself grace. I think sometimes it's a-okay to want to grow all the time, want to stretch, but we got to give ourselves some grace. I don't hit every metric I want in my life, and that's okay. I don't throw the whole metric away, like, forget this, I'm never doing it again. But being okay with that is something I had to learn to do. It's like, Trenelle, you won't be able to hit everything you set. The goal is, are you closer to it? And that's the biggest part for me, is, are you closer to it? And that's a win. So yes, that's how I operate there.
So, you kind of very clearly articulated why, or how you avoid the crash, but, we all still experience it. We all
Oh
still
yeah.
experience these kind of downtimes or failures, as we like to call them in this class. Tell me about, what you perceive your most important failure or failures have been that have allowed you to really move forward in different ways.
That's a great question. I kind of took some notes on that one because I want to be specific about a failure that really kind of, most people may say, oh, that's nothing. But to me, it was a shocker. So I won't ever forget the date, but February 8th, 2016. I had just gotten back from New York Fashion Week. I was working with a company that was making the Apple Watches. We had just closed a deal to do a launch for Nordstrom retailers. So I was super excited to help close this. I mean, we're already in Best Buy and things, remember, we were all over already. That had helped them build over the 2.5 years I've been there. We had traveled to Germany and Vegas a bunch for conferences. I mean, just all around. It was a great organization, great company. And I get into work on that Monday, and I'm like, this seems a little, people aren't really here. It's kind of quiet. I'm not thinking anything of it. Get pulled into the office, and they explain that they had decided to let the entire staff go, and they had just sold the company over the weekend. And that shock was like, what in the world? We were in New York this weekend together. Like, I don't know what had happened behind the scenes, but we were all, like, the entire staff were all let go and was bought out by another company after we had built this entire, I mean, we had literally built this from scratch, like this division, and all the retailers. And they said, effective today, of course they apologized, and, all the technical stuff that would happen when you get laid off, they offered me a great package, and fine. But for me, it was a shocker of, like, I had invested so much time and had put so many things at the wayside. I mean, family was on the back burner. Everyone knew Trenelle's job. Everyone kind of knew that was my place. Like, everyone's like, Trenelle always did. She's always working, because I was on weekends, overnight, like late shifts, traveling all over. I mean, doing everything. I mean, my health was awful. Like, it was a lot of things going on that I was sacrificing for this organization. And to be completely blindsided by that, I was of course sad. I, of course, got all the cries out, all that stuff out. And it made me think about how I had failed there, and not necessarily from the job perspective, but I failed myself. And I failed myself because I got so caught up in the title and the position of this organization that I had lost sight of everything outside of that. I had lost sight of the personal development, the personal growth, because I didn't have many skills. I knew how to sell what they were teaching me how to sell, but I had no other skills. And I had spent these years doing that for them, not even thinking about the idea that this may not last. What are you doing outside of this to make sure you're staying ahead of your game? And it was so consuming that I didn't even find the space or think there was space to do anything more. And that's why I've kind of done this 360 around, oh, no, you need to make sure you're growing outside of just your career. So that failure, as I kind of wrote some notes down about it, it was kind of what I learned was that my value wasn't in my vocation, right? Like, it wasn't in that. Like, I wanted to be independent. I don't want to be Trenelle. I don't want to have the name of the company and Trenelle. I want it to be Trenelle works there, and she does this and she does that. So that was a quick wake-up call for me, and it shocked me. I was kind of like, people talk about getting laid off, let go. I had never thought about that, because any job I'd had before, I had voluntarily left. So it was kind of shocking to have that experience, especially after we had done so well. And I was kind of like, usually when you get laid off, it's because the company isn't doing well, but we were doing so well that buyers came in and say, hey, we're going to soup this up and take it out from under you. And they sold it, right? So that was a shocker. And I really started thinking about how much I have to do and how much more I could become. And I think that, again, going back to our initial conversation about the importance of personal growth and always growing yourself, because you have to keep your own skills sharp. You have to, because the minute you get comfortable or feel like, hey, this job loves me, I'm here for life, I'm going to be set here, bring me my retirement checks, it's usually not going to happen that way, right? So being attentive to that, and also just paying attention to the areas of your life that you may be, neglecting. And for me, it was family, it was friends. I mean, literally, for the time I was working at that company, people still talk about it. They were like, yes, you were completely MIA, because it was all about this company. Because I was so excited to have, be growing best. I got into Best Buy. I'm like, this is awesome. Things remembered. And it's like, here I am, this, young 20-some-year-old, negotiating big deals with these big retailers. I thought I won. I'm like, wow, we're traveling all over. I mean, I've seen parts of the world I probably would never saw, and it was all paid for. I'm like, this is the life. Like, people need to do what I'm doing. And then having that shock coming on Monday, like, wait a minute, we're gone. And that's it. So for me, I really learned a lot about balance. And it's crazy. I know people say there really isn't a balance. It has to be balance and boundaries to some extent, because if not, you'll weigh so much on one side that the other side you're completely neglecting. You try and pick it back up, but it's been so much, I would say, so much scarring there, especially with my family and friends. They're like, Trenelle, like, you're trying to come back into, be a part of this again, and you've been MIA for years, and it's because I was kind of so proud of what I was doing, like, had to look at me, when it was ripped under me. It's kind of like, oh, it's just me here. Hey guys, welcome me back, take me back. So it was pretty interesting. It was pretty interesting. It's so fun. I still have the date in mind. I'm like, wow, that was a day for me, because I just didn't even know how to react. I'm like, who do you call after you get, who do you call after this type of situation? They're like, they gave me an Apple Watch. Like, oh, you keep the Apple Watch we gave you, because of course we're selling the cases, so we all had Apple Watches. I'm like, oh, well, thanks for Apple Watch, thanks. But it was interesting. But again, it taught me a lot about not getting so wrapped up in your vocation. For me, it started to become, who am I impacting? What are the people in my life? If I wasn't around, what would they be saying about me? And I hope it wouldn't just be, oh yeah, she works at this company that makes Apple Watches. She's a really good rep for them. What is that? That's not much to go off of. So the importance of having, not letting your vocation take over your whole life. I think I learned in that instance, and I did it pretty young. So I'm happy. I hope I never have to go through that again. But it was something that immediately made me think about, okay, I need to go on a personal growth plan and stay on it. So that was a big one for me.
No, that's amazing. And yes, as a 20-something-year-old person, that kind of thing can be, imagine, terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Not only is it shocking because you were absolutely flying high, but something that we just aren't prepared for. Nope. Right? So you talked about, like, now how that made you refocus a little bit more on yourself, and less on the job. Did that also change kind of how you view motivations? Are you more kind of internalized in terms of motivations as opposed to externalized?
It's so funny you bring that up. So I think from that experience, because kind of backtracking a little bit, my background or my lineage comes from immigrant family, a completely immigrant. I'm the first gen in the U.S. So my family's from the Caribbean, Trinidad. So they didn't really know how to navigate corporate America. They were mostly in trades and things like that, and just kind of made things happen. So when I was the first one to go to college, it was kind of like, yay, Trenelle's going to college. They really didn't know what that meant. They were kind of like, go do it, kind of thumbs up, figure it out. So I've always been figuring things out for myself for a while. So as I reflected back on that experience, I was kind of like, okay, Trenelle, your next move has to be your best move. I knew that. And I said, I need to work on becoming the example I wish I had when I was growing up. Because when that happened, I was kind of like, who do I call? Like, who? I called my mom. She's going to be crying and sad. And she doesn't really have much to offer, to tell me, like, do anything different. My younger sister, my grandmother, my uncles, no one was thriving in that season for me to feel comfortable calling them and telling them this bad news. Because again, up until that point, I was kind of the poster child for what they thought success looked like. And they were kind of like, my mom was so proud. Like, she'll tell me, oh yeah, Trenelle's not coming to the family event. She's going to Germany, or she's, she was so proud of that. So to tell her to kind of crush her kind of dream as being her firstborn, and she's doing so well, I was like, I can't call her. So then I thought to myself, when I'm thinking of my plan of how to get out of this or get to, the next, where I was going next, it was kind of a reflective time of, you need to become the evidence. You need to become the evidence and become the example that you wanted to see when you were growing up. And I think that really changed my thinking of wanting to be more around people that were in the same stage of life as me, kind of going through some of the same things and trying to navigate it. All I really wanted that season was a listening ear and just some guidance on like how not to put myself down, how not to take this on as I did something, because that guilt comes. You're like, man, I could have done better. Huh? I mean, Q2, how was Q2 at? And you get in this stage of like, what did I do? Versus saying, this has nothing to do with you. You've done such a great job. Another company came and bought it in. And that's the power of not owning something, right? Because I didn't own that. All that work I did, I didn't own that. Someone else owned that, So it became one of those, that's why I figured, okay, well, Trenelle, what you can own is what you do with yourself, how you grow yourself, the skills you decide to develop, and how you put your next best foot forward. And that's really what shifted there. But for me, it became this charge of, again, becoming the evidence. Like, this is part of life. I mean, getting laid off, I think most people have went through that. But again, I was kind of naive in that because I'm like, oh, I'm not going to go through that. And then when it happened, it was kind of like, oh, wow, I went through that. What do I want the story to be? Because it's kind of some of the things you try and block out of your story. I'm like, no, that's a part of my story, because it turned a light bulb in me that I don't think it would have been turned on unless that happened, because I was flying high for so long. So I needed the pause for a second. You're not quite there yet. You're still really young. Still a lot of things to learn in this corporate America world. So that's really where the shift happened for me, was becoming that evidence and saying, okay, for someone that calls you and say, hey, Trenelle, this just happened to me, or I have an inkling. What are some advice I can give that him or her to not have them in their own pity party for too long? So, yeah.
So that aligns with something that I frequently tell people, in all areas, not just in academia. There's a premium paid on mentorship, but we're sometimes in such a mode of, maybe I look at you and say, I think I know what Trenelle needs. Trenelle, you should have this person as a mentor. And that's almost always wrong, right? The
Yep.
best mentors are the ones that we choose for ourselves. And you went kind of the next step further. You decided that you didn't even have necessarily that ideal mentor, but you created kind of who you wanted to be. I love that term, becoming the evidence. And now, it sounds like you're holding yourself up as being available for others to kind of navigate that path, and people can seek you out. And again, choosing your own mentor. And in your case, you kind of chose yourself, which I think is pretty interesting and very, I mean, that's a level of self-awareness that I think few of us benefit from that early in our lives. And so that's exciting and impressive.
And I think too, it became, thank you for that, for sure. But I think it became one of those things of, I have a big network, and I'm growing this network all the time. And I think a lot of times people look at their network and saying, what can my network do for me? It's kind of what can they do for me? Okay, I'm in some legal issues. Who's in here as a lawyer? It's like you're looking around for what your network can do for you. And I kind of said, Trenelle, you want to have almost some stuff to put on the table when you come to the table to your network. Like, hey, I learned this, I did that, versus just being a taker, and that was really an eye opener, because I do notice a lot of people are willing to mentor people because they feel like, hey, much has been given to me, much is earned, so I need to give back in some way. And I appreciate that. At the same time, for us that are looking for mentors, we also got to come to the table with something, saying, okay, I'm coachable, I'm mentorable, I listen, I'm accountable. Like, you got to come with something. And I kept feeling I was coming to those tables looking for someone to give me your wisdom. What should I do? What should I do that? But I gave him nothing in return. It felt so one-sided. So when this happened, I said, okay, Trenelle, you can call your entire network. You can probably get a job here in the next month. But that's like a begging thing. It's like, I got laid off, a sob story. They're all like, oh my gosh, Trenelle, you're so young. Okay, well, I didn't want that. I didn't want just a hand out. I really was looking for like the hand up. And I think when I got into this situation, this was probably the current role I have now. This happened about 6 months after I was laid off, and I wasn't really looking, because I tell people all the time, have your savings in order. I had about a year in savings, things like that. So I wasn't worried about rushing to get a job. So because I had that amount of savings, I thought, okay, well, I'll take a year sabbatical. I'll just relax for a year, and then I'll go back to the corporate America. But this role came up because, again, I was at church, and 6 months later, I'm still doing everything as normal. I'm kind of applying for jobs, not really, but really taking the time to spend kind of recoup time with family. So I was spending a lot more time with family, going to my cousin's schools and family events, and kind of just doing everything with them in this period. And then 6 months or so later is when, I'm at church, and, the lady's like, let's sit down, let's grab coffee. I'm like, okay, not even thinking anything of it. And then at the end of that coffee date, she's offered me a position to start next week, So that's kind of how this role happened with the cyber role. But again, I wasn't necessarily looking, but I was also very attentive to what was going on. What are the conversations about? What are things happening? And I think around that same time, there were some companies in Orange County that had been hacked. Some bigger companies. I remember the conversation, watching the news. I'm kind of like, oh wow, this cyber stuff these hackers are crazy. And I'm thinking, okay, what side do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the bad side, the black hackers, or do you want to be on the good side? You kind of think about that because they're both businesses, right? So, and then when she brought the cyber thing, I'm like, okay, I keep hearing this cyber thing. Let me talk to her. And that's really how this came together, right? But it was one of those. It was really I would say, a fallout from me saying, okay, I want to start bringing something to the table when I'm talking to folks versus just asking them what they can do for me, and kind of taking all their wisdom or asking them for all their knowledge, when it's like, it can be something so simple, me helping them make other connections through my network is helpful, So that's really how that turned around. It's worked really well. It's again, helped me grow my network a lot, but allowed me to say, I've turned more into the giver versus the taker. And that feels good. It definitely feels good.
Very cool. So we are about out of time. You have any parting words of wisdom for the students who are trying to learn about innovation and failure?
I tell you that I would say, Trenelle, to all the students who are going to watch this, failure is, we hear this all the time, that failure is a stepping stone to success. I always tell people that failure is never final unless you decide to quit, right? That's where it's like you're just living with it. But I think it's important to realize, like, the quicker you can fail, the better, because then as failures happens in life, you're able to react to them differently. I'm happy I failed in life in certain things earlier, because now when something happens and I don't get my way, it doesn't work out, I can digest it. I'm kind of like, okay, let me reflect. And I think the reflection part of failure, or things that you missed and things like that, is so important. And for me, I've learned to start writing things out. I know we're so into the technology and phones and computers, but I literally write out, like, let's put 2 columns. What did you do and what didn't you do? And then look at that and say, okay, well, now it makes sense why it failed. And that becomes taking the ownership of why something happened or didn't happen. So whether it's a workout plan, a health regimen, if you're not seeing the results you want, have you done the things necessary? And then it starts to being, you can't blame anyone else. It becomes the ownership of that. So I always tell folks, the quicker you can fail, the better, but be reflective about it so you don't keep repeating it. Something I've learned, don't repeat it. Be reflective about it. But yeah, that's what I would tell them.
Sorry, I can't. Excellent.
Yes.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I agree 100%. You don't just want to fail early. You want to fail intelligently, right?
Exactly.
Make sure you're learning something from that experience. Trenelle, thank you so much for joining us today on Innovation Out of Failure. This is really wonderful, and the concepts and ideas that you've shared about personal growth and development, I think, are going to pay great dividends for the students. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Andrew. Have a great day.
You too. I'd like to thank Trenelle for taking the time to join us and share some amazing perspectives, and also thanks to you for listening to Innovation Out of Failure. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I do hope you'll check out all of my other interviews with amazing innovators. Once again, my name is Andrew Lyon. Thank you for listening.